Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Christopher Bedford, and joining me today is Michael Pack. He's the CEO of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, starting in June. It's after a 2-year confirmation battle about. It's not his first political appointment. A film producer, writer, and director, he has served as the co-chair of the International TV Council for the Public Broadcasting Corporation. In 2002, he served on the National Council of the Humanities, and for 2 years, he was the CEO of the Claremont Institute and published their wonderful review of books, the only lifetime membership I have to any magazine. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So, Michael, you come into a position that was hard fought for lots of political reasons, in charge of a group of, some Americans might not be too familiar with the U.S. Agency for Global Media, but most Americans are familiar with Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, some of the programs that are under your purview. I think they would be surprised, those who are well familiar with your work, to realize how many hundreds of millions of people around the world hear American journalism from those airwaves, from those reporters. But there has been a problem at the Voice of America and some of its affiliates over the last couple of years. It's been criticized for being a very liberal wing of the new corporate American news media as opposed to a voice for American democracy. And most recently was criticized for some potential security lapses and also for publishing a vote for Joe Biden message in a foreign language, telling them that Biden stands with Islam against Donald Trump, or at least the Arab-speaking people. You cleaned house on that.
Indeed.
It's a rare thing there. Things. And you've received some backlash because the reporters have friends in the media.
Yeah, they're all journalists in the first place, and they're very wired into the media. On my first day at USAGM, I changed the leadership of the 5 broadcasting networks, and that included, although she resigned the day before I came, Amanda Bennett was director of the Voice of America, and her husband, Don Graham, was formerly publisher of the Washington Post, so she's very well connected, and that is perhaps a high end, but not atypical of the connections people have there. But just to go back to the beginning of your comment, I think people don't know that much about USAGM, although they have some sense. But this agency was founded in 1999, and it brought together 5 broadcasting entities, or what grew to be 5 broadcasting entities that are essentially government broadcasters: Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which you mentioned, Radio Free Asia, Middle East Broadcasting, and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. And you're right, they are one of the biggest broadcasting entities in the world. We broadcast in over 71 languages with an estimated audience of over 350 million a week. And as you say, Chris, that's a lot of people.
It is. It's about the size of my audience. Similar. My Twitter following.
And you're entitled to that audience. But we also broadcast in 71 languages, which maybe you do not do. And so that's more languages, I think, than anybody else, including the BBC World Service. So it's a very impressive organization. It has a budget of about $800 million a year. And it has an important mission, as you said. The mission is to tell America's story to the world. And now that our values and our principles are under attack, especially from China and Russia and Iran, North Korea, we need to defend our values and what we stand for. As you mentioned, the Claremont Institute, an institution dedicated to preserving and restoring those principles. They go back to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and those are the values that we need to explain to the world and promote. And that is a very important mission, more important now than ever before, which is why I wanted to run this agency. I had been in international broadcasting even before the things you listed on my resume. In 1991, I ran WorldNet, which is now the TV part of the Voice of America. And that was the end of the Cold War, and that was part of the glory days of international broadcasting. The VOA and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty were instrumental in providing news and information that facilitated the collapse of the Soviet Union. They were cited frequently by Václav Havel and Lech Walesa, and this was when these agencies stood as a beacon of liberty to the world, and should and can do that again.
The the Voice of America as we see it now, and you're talking about the Board of Governors brought about in 1999, was there a big switch in that moment in 1999, and maybe in this mission since you were there during the glory days in 1993, from when it was first founded during World War II, and its mission in the Cold War to get those ideas out there and to be a voice for freedom, democracy, the United States way of life, and also the dissidents who stand with that way of life in countries that have censorship. When was that culture changed, when it became what it is now with Amanda Bennett, who was very vocal at the beginning of the Trump administration, on the record and often off the record, very, very easily identified in news stories talking about people who are coming in to destroy their journalistic freedom? Was that something that is a more modern thing, or has this been a slow rot like so many American international institutions have, with liberalism inside of them undermining them?
Well, the mission of these agencies has not changed. The Voice of America in particular has a very clear charter. It has 3 points. One is to tell the news in an objective and balanced way, meaning have the full range of American opinions featured in it. And it's supposed to explain American ideas and institutions, like the Declaration and the Constitution, to the world. And 3, it is supposed to represent the administration's point of view, along with legitimate criticism, but in a full and forthright manner. And my goal is simply to get it back to fulfilling that mission. So in terms of its drift from it, so the agency was formed in 1999, as you said, run by a board of half Democrats, half Republicans, supposed to each be putting in a day a month. Well, you can't run a huge broadcasting organization like that. And it was eventually recognized by everybody of both parties. It was called defunct by Hillary Clinton, but John Kerry and many Republicans recognized that it was just not working. So at the end of the Obama administration, they created my job. I'm the CEO, and I replaced the board because someone has to run a broadcasting operation and make sure it adheres to its mission. So I would say from 1999 to just when I came in 2 months ago, it had this period of drift with very little oversight. So what happens when there's that kind of drift? What happens is corruption, such as the examples you pointed to, rise up, as well as, because of the way the media works, a drift to the left. Ronald Reagan apparently famously said that if you take your hands off the wheel, the car drifts left. And that is surely true in the media. You can't even really blame them. That is the media culture. It is not, I think, controversial to say that. So, however, it's one thing for CNN or MSNBC or Fox, for that matter, to have a point of view. This agency is required by law to be objective and represent all points of view. So it has to adhere to those standards, whatever the rest of the media does.
There's a difference between what Voice of America is supposed to be doing, and, for example, what the BBC is doing, something, or even public broadcasting in general might be doing, which is a little bit more of a separation, a wall possibly between the just foreign policy interests and domestic interests of the United States and journalism, or at least the complete freedom of journalists to take an editorial stance in things that matter to them. Now, you, of course, have worked in public broadcasting corporations, so correct me if I'm wrong there. What differentiates Voice of America's mission and from something like maybe the BBC and how it should be executed, and why you think it's off the rails? Right now in England, maybe they used to stand for British values. Now they stand against Brexit. They stand against the sitting government. It's a voice that undermines the administration.
Well, the BBC, there's the commercial BBC, the national BBC, and the BBC World Service, and that's closer to the Voice, and it's supposed to represent British values abroad. I'm not sure to what extent it does or it doesn't. But public broadcasting actually is the other institution that is required by law to be objective and balanced. Whether it is or not is a subject for perhaps another podcast.
Even Sesame Street's
activist
now.
There's a lot to be said about that, I was a senior VP of programming at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, so I know that debate well. That's sort of another debate too. So whatever commercial broadcasters do, like the BBC, they're kind of a quasi-governmental one, but whatever CNN or any other network does is one thing. We need to adhere to different standards. And in my time there, as you pointed out earlier, I have found egregious examples of flouting of those standards. And my job really is to drain the swamp, to root out corruption, and to deal with these issues of bias, not to tell journalists what to report. I sort of agree with the premise of one of your questions, that there needs to be separation between us, the political appointees, and what journalists are reporting. I would never tell a journalist how to cover a story or what to say. However, I am there to make sure that the procedures and practices that ensure the highest journalistic standards and the fulfilling of the contract of the VOA charter are fulfilled. And so when we've run across a very egregious flouting of that charter, you mentioned the sort of Urdu service controversy.
No, excuse me, Urdu, not Arabic.
Yeah, Urdu. Well, I'm sure there'll be an Arabic problem as well, but at the moment it's Urdu. So in the Urdu service, we found that on their VOA's own social media platforms, they were posting what could only be described as a Biden ad.
It was. I watched it.
You watched the whole thing?
It's a Biden ad.
It's pretty shocking. I mean, it was even shocking to me. It begins with quotes from Joe Biden, referencing Muhammad and translating into Arabic, followed by what in fact was a Biden ad, where Muslims in Michigan were called to vote for Biden. They made the point that the state went for Trump by whatever X thousands of votes, and that millions of Muslims in Michigan could flip it. Perhaps a logical ad for the Biden campaign, but should we be running it with the VOA's logo on it?
In foreign markets.
In foreign markets, and we are not supposed to target the United States at all, and this is clearly targeted to the people of Michigan who do live in the United States. So it violates the VOA charter. It may well violate the Hatch Act and the Smith-Mund Act and other things, and so it was an egregious example. So we found that, and unlike in the past when these things come up, we have tried to institute a process where people all the way up the chain in management are held responsible for this, and try to put procedures and controls in place so that it doesn't happen again.
And that's a very difficult thing to do. A lot of media companies, now at least in your position, a lot of media companies nowadays are at will employment. You may have a contract essentially that might need to be fulfilled, at least monetarily. But the age of the old guild making it almost impossible to fire a reporter or a printer are over. The ages of pensions, the ages of three martini expense accounts are largely over. I'm sure that the last one is not as big a thing at the VOA, but there are union employees, and I from friends who've gone through this, it's a very difficult place to be let go from. You have a lot of avenues to resist this. How have you gone about, what have you done in response to this, and how have you gone about getting through those difficult barriers?
Well, I can't comment on the details of personnel actions, but you are quite right that it's challenging. At the VOA, there are a combination of personal service contractors that just have a contract and government employees that have civil service protections. But just because they have civil service protections doesn't mean they can do whatever they want. There are still disciplinary procedures that can take place, and we are using the legitimate disciplinary procedures that exist. But I think what's singular in a way is that we actually want to call this, when this happens, to call people's attention to it, bring it to the light of day, and start to look into what can be done. People have done these things in the past, especially under Amanda Bennett, who you referred to, with no consequences. Perhaps, not even, the most we heard of was an admonition, let alone even anything stronger than that.
And just don't give away the cards, as opposed to don't be so blatantly anti-conservative.
Well, that's right. So we're trying to use the mechanisms that we have. I'm not, an expert in how to, and labor and play relations in government agencies, but we've got people who are, and we're trying to use the mechanisms we have. But I think an important thing is this: expose them to the media, like talking about it with you on your podcast, so that people know about it. I think before there was a tendency to sweep them under the rug, but we think we have to call to the light of day. People should know what's going on. I mean, the first of this was President Trump, as you mentioned during my long confirmation battle. It actually was 3 years and 3 months.
Wow.
At the end of it, he referred to VOA programming as disgusting. And I think he had in mind, I don't know.
He's got away with words.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump often speaks the common sense of things. And so I think this Urdu video is exactly the kind of thing he had in mind, and I think it's my responsibility to make sure that does not happen. It is a challenging thing to do that in a government agency. There is no doubt about it. And as you said also earlier, I've gotten a lot of pushback even in the 2 months I'm there. But look, I took the job. He asked me to do that. I have to find the right ways to do it.
So who are these people? How many people work as journalists and a couple maybe top-level publisher executive type positions in this organization? And who are they? Are they career public servants? Or are they journalists? Are they people who come from corporate media, from the journalism schools? Or do they come off of the streets? Is this a beginning to end job?
Well, it's a perhaps boringly complex picture. But yeah, so now you forced me to go down to these level of details, but you asked for it. So the Voice of America and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting are federal agencies. So the majority of their employees are civil servants.
Career civil servants?
Career civil servants and these personal service contractors. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and Middle East Broadcasting are 501c3s, grantees. So they get grants, and so their employees are not civil servants in the same way. So they have another and different set of protections, making it complicated. But to answer what you're really going there is you get a really mixture of people, and differently in sort of the English language news service than in the foreign language news services. Historically, places like Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty would get people fleeing from the Soviet Union during the 70s and 80s that really wanted to fight for freedom in their country. Some were journalists, but some were really motivated by a passion to counter Soviet communism. So we get some people like that. We get a lot of journalists who, as you said, implied, I forget what was on camera or off mic or on mic, looking for a pension. Journalists who want that, which is rare in the rest of the world. So you get a mixture of people. You get a lot of career bureaucrats, like in every government agency. So it's really a blend and a combination. And one of the challenges in taking over an agency at this moment in time is sorting all this out, especially during COVID. The building where the headquarters building, the Cohen building here in Washington, D.C., is largely empty. We're bringing people back as we move from phase one and
Have
forward.
you considered banning masks and turning off the air conditioning? That's my prescription for federal agencies.
Yeah, well, we'll have to look into that one. But it's been hard to get to know the employees when they're largely working from home. But there are about 4,000 over all the broadcasters, so it's a lot of people. And their backgrounds are mixed. And I met some really great ones and some very passionate ones, and people who still, for instance, on the China example, who are deeply upset about the country falling under totalitarian communist rule, not falling under, but getting worse and worse, and want to do something about it and get the truth to their to their fellow countrymen who are living under this kind of oppression. And it's a noble thing, and there are journalists who are risking their lives that are working for us. We have journalists in Hong Kong that were threatened, and they're threatened all the time. And there are a lot of journalists who are heroically motivated by a desire to get the truth to these areas, and I think they need to be celebrated. So I don't want to downplay that. And they're heroic. I mean, you and I have been journalists. I've never risked my life.
Not like the heroic press corps guys say they are, because Trump tweeted at them, like actual.
That's right.
Actual heroes.
People who risk their lives, where courage
outside of brunch.
Outside of brunch, yeah, too much fattening food problem. But no, that's right. They're actually risking their lives, and those people need to be celebrated, and that's really, and they're core to the mission, to reach the people, to do what they want to do. We are the only Uyghur service in the world, Uyghur language service, to try to encourage these Uyghurs, who, as you know, are being rounded up and sent to re-education camps by the Chinese Communist Party. And it's noble that we're doing that. And obviously, the people in our Uyghur service are putting their families at risk. The Chinese Communist Party knows who their families are. I feel awed by it. They're actually putting their life and their family's life on the line.
Oh, it's amazing.
So there are people like that.
Even if you've gotten your family, I know some reporters have had to pull back from this very important reporting and only be able to help in advisory roles, because even if you and your wife or your kids are out of China, if your grandmother's in China or your cousin's in China or your brother or your friends, they will be hurt by your actions. And And as we were discussing earlier, we won't go too deep into because it's off topic. China can reach out and touch you here.
Indeed.
And especially in Europe. When you were awaiting your confirmation, Radio Free Europe was under attack from Russia. They called them foreign agents, and they've made it very difficult to broadcast in Russia. And that kind of plays into the security role that these organizations play, and the American role these organizations play, how they're treated by dictators and foreign governments that are hostile toward us. But it's also played into some of the bigger defenses against human attacks on you, where people, including my friend Tom Rogan at the Washington Examiner, saying that you're compromising security and our ability to combat these foreign countries by taking actions against what you have called, and I think the records have borne out, our security lapses and problems in our foreign hiring and in who we've brought on to these organizations. So, outside of Voice of America reporting on you, which is always interesting,
It is interesting.
To answer, what security lapses have you discovered, and how have you gone about this? And what would you say to those critics who say that you're compromising the United States' security by purging these journalists?
Well, I'm not purging them, but I've only been there 2 months, and I discovered shortly after I arrived that over 10 years, a 10-year period, the Office of Personnel Management and the Office of the National Director of Intelligence have been doing investigations into our agency and found huge security lapses. 1,500 out of our employees, 40%, have been improperly vetted. A huge number. And the vetting had been, I posted on our website, because I'm a believer in transparency, the last of these OPM reports. The ODNI report is sort of too sensitive to post, and people can look at it. It's on our website. The security lapses are, I think, pretty shocking. There are cases where we would take fingerprints and not submit them to anywhere. There are places where people made up social security numbers.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I have a responsibility to make sure that the security of these agencies is maintained. And the fact is that foreign intelligence agencies, from the beginning of the creation of these agencies, have been interested in penetrating them. Journalism, to be a journalist is a great cover for a spy. Famous journalists like Kim Philby worked for BBC, we talked about earlier. It's just a great cover. And from the beginning, from the Cold War and even earlier, they've been penetrated. It's a great place to put a foreign spy. I have to make sure that doesn't happen, to stand up for the national security interests of Americans. So we are doing everything we can to cure this as quickly as we can. And part of that is we have J1 visas for some foreign journalists that we are supposed to approve yearly. We have been rubber stamping them and not putting them through an approval process, but I'm legally obligated to do that. So I can't just give these people, even if they're lovely people, a J1 visa without going through the process, or I'd be potentially endangering the security of America. So I am anxious to fix this as quickly as I can. I feel this was a mess dumped on me by senior management over a long period of time. I was not told about it during my long wait for confirmation, or even the 2 months I was there, by existing staff. It's a huge problem. I'm working hard to fix it, but it does mean that people who are waiting for visa exceptions are waiting. But it's a problem that I have uncovered, just like the Urdu problem. You uncover these problems and then you have to deal with them. And I think that a contempt for security procedures goes along with a contempt for the standards of journalism and the mission of the Voice of America and USAGM. It to me fits in. It's all sort of a piece. It's the swamp. It's corruption. It's bias. They sort of come together, and it's up to me to sort of to fix them all. I mean, this agency is rife with these problems. Yeah, there's way more than I thought, and I think that's part of the reason people fought so hard against my confirmation, fear that I would uncover this, as I have. But there's more than I thought, and the fight against it is much uglier than I thought. And journalists have gone after even staff members of mine personally in a way that I think is really inappropriate, raising the cost of even working with me and trying to uncover these problems. But I think we've done a great deal in 2 months. I'm curing these things as quickly as possible. Tell that to your friends who would like me to cure them faster.
What risk do these? What do you when you say those are security risks? So if you're a translator for news services in Afghanistan, or another one of the journalists at any level. What are some of the kind of risks that you're talking about that people pose to the United States?
No, I'm just saying that how do we know when someone is working here? They have to be cleared by they have to get a security clearance, so we make sure they're not working for a foreign intelligence service. For example, you could be a translator for a Chinese translator and have a very humble position, but if you have high access, and if you have access, a government pass, and you have access to the computer, you can also be used by foreign intelligence services, and there's a history of doing that. I don't say that I know in any case of any individual person, like a translator or a foreign language
That's the
journalist.
problem, is you don't know, because the processes haven't been followed.
That's exactly right. So I can't just, people want me to make random exceptions for friends of theirs, but that's as corrupt as the things that I'm uncovering. And sometimes people want me to make exceptions for people because they're politically close to me. But I can't do that either. That's just what my predecessors did on the other side. That is not the right way to do it, and I have to follow the law.
This is his way to say you're fired, Emily, and you'll be deported tomorrow. I know you're short on time. I would love to be able to talk for an hour, but we'll wrap up shortly with what Americans are curious what is going on with China. Right now, the focus is amazingly on the post office, and the government seems to have, outside of the administration, seems to have so quickly lost its grasp on China and the threat it poses, and the damage it's done to the country with COVID. And at the same time, a lot of media organizations that don't have $1 billion of investments, like Bloomberg, American media organizations, independent ones, have been exiled from China, and the operations have been shut down. What kind of work can you tell our listeners about what your journalists and executives are doing to reach the dissidents and the subjects in China, and to get America's message abroad?
Well, we have two services that are targeted on China, Radio Free Asia and the Mandarin service of the Voice of America. And they are both aggressively working to get into China. I mentioned the Uyghur service, but we use whatever means we can. Shortwave, which works, believe it or not, in regional China, but also also direct broadcasts and
no
affiliates
satellite radio
places.
in the prison camps?
Yeah, that's right.
That's so weird.
It is, yeah. They don't get all the comforts of home. So sad. So, we use every technology we can, but, even the VOA Mandarin service was one of these ones that had controversy under my predecessor, Amanda Bennett, where 5 Mandarin journalists were interviewing a dissident, and they was cut off midway, and those journalists were fired. So we are trying to make sure that, like in every service, that they're in fact doing what they should be doing in Mandarin and in both Chinese services. But another important thing in reaching these people in China, but all over the world, is getting around their internet firewalls. So, in China it's called the Great Firewall, and they're trying to block.
Wonderful American technology.
That's correct. They're using they're using the American technology, and they're inventing their own to block our technology. So people in China then don't have access to the internet. So we have an office called the Office of Internet Freedom, and another thing called the Open Technology Fund that funds internet firewall circumvention. I think that is a hugely important thing. If people could have access to the internet and through the internet to both our language services, but everything else, they'd be able to resist the totalitarian control of China and other governments in Iran and North Korea. So we have a fund to develop those technologies and get them into the field, and that's really important too. That's gotten me some controversy. We have tried hard to get as much money as we can out to a widest variety of internet firewall circumvention tools, but I think America as a whole has to do more. These internet firewalls have been called the Berlin Walls of our time, and that may be an apt analogy. If you can get people access to information, it's then much harder to oppress them, and that's an important part of our mission.
Well, thank you, Michael. This has been another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. Until next time, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.